was one of the key people who kept focused on if this is the right thing to say, then it's still the right thing to say. And sometimes we lose focus on that as we go through this world where it seems that there's infinite change and constant innovation in the process. And if I look back over, my career, so to speak, in a much tinier, much less significant world in a vast sense, the key single transferable speech that I would have had since the mid-90s would be that, quality content matters. And it has been a tremendous struggle, and it still remains a tremendous struggle. I was just off a call a couple of hours ago with this entity that's involved in big data and around automotive and, people using cars and things like that. And basically they said, oh, let's collect all, they've all this data and isn't that wonderful? We'll collect all this data. So they focused on collecting all the data and, they don't know what to do with it. And they realized that the vast majority of it is actually useless. But they approached it from this classic point of view that has come in since technology, modern technology and computers, in that it's all about the production and the collection of stuff. And that actually it doesn't really matter, or somebody else will figure it out later, what's the good stuff and what's the bad stuff in the process. But we see all the consequences of treating content as a commodity, not having quality editorial or filters or whatever. We see, in essence, the collapse of democracy in the United States as just one of the consequences of a world where there are no filters, where there's no agreement on what is quality or what is standards. So it has been a lonely fight I've found in many organizations to actually convince, particularly senior management, that quality content matters, that it's not simply about buying a new search engine or having an app or getting a bot or a new CMS, because the cult of technology is so strong that the magical technology will somehow work it out. And we see in the consequences of artificial intelligence that it's not doing a fantastic job in many of these areas, because technology is not that great at understanding what true meaning is and what true quality is, and that this is a skill set that is still extremely valuable, even if the organizations that you're working for are ignoring it. I do believe that we are coming towards a time where there's a greater recognition of quality content and the people who can help achieve that sort of quality. Because we are facing a crisis of overproduction and glut, and people have talked about information overload a lot over the years, and it is actually true. We are now in zettabytes of data. Now, a zettabyte of data is so unimaginably large. It's extraordinary. I calculated that if you were to print out 1 zettabyte of data, you would need 20 trillion trees worth of paper to actually print out just 1 zettabyte of data. Now, on this planet, on the entire planet, there's about 3 trillion trees at the moment. So you need 6-7 times more trees than exist in the entire planet just to print out 1 zettabyte of data. And by 2035, they estimate we'll have over 2,000 zettabytes of data. So we've created these machines and devices and technologies that is just throwing off data and throwing off stuff in vast, utterly unmanageable quantities. And organizations are literally being flooded with data. as a consequence, so much of it is either not being used or thrown away or can't even be stored for long periods. So 90% of data is never accessed 3 months after it's stored. 80% of data never accessed, 90% of data never analyzed, 90% of data never analyzed, 90% of Internet of Things data is never used. So the question becomes, why are we collecting this stuff we never use? Why do we collect all this stuff that we never use? And what are the consequences of this for ourselves and our jobs, but for the planet? The consequences of the machines that are used to store these things. 90% of what we're doing in digital is crap. It's not used, it has no function, it has no use. And yet we have these massive data centers in these millions of computers and these sensors collecting and storing crap. And the consequences of those, to store over 2,000 zettabytes of data based on current hard disk costs would be somewhere in the region of $60 trillion. Now, the entire global economy is $80 trillion. So to store about 2,000 zettabytes would cost $60 trillion. It's just not manageable. It's not doable. We are creating over 50 million tons of e-waste every year, enough to easily cover an area the size of Manhattan. So we've created this massive digital engine, this cult of volume, all these machines and devices that produce stuff, the vast majority of that stuff which has no even value, because for millions of years we lived in a world of want, and now we live in a world of abundance, of glut, and our minds still want, and we can't realize that we are constantly overloading the world and overloading ourselves in the process. Websites. It's estimated that there's about 1.8 billion websites. So one website for every 3 people, 4 people on the planet, right? And studies show that 91% of content on the web gets no traffic from Google. Isn't that extraordinary? And you wonder, all this effort to produce, all the energy, all the waste goes into creating these pages, these templates, these graphics. You know how much effort it takes to write 500 words and get it approved, etc., and create this stuff. And so much of this stuff is never even been found. Why are we doing this stuff? Why are we destroying the planet for nothing? Because this digital is an accelerant of so many bad behaviors. We could not have fast fashion if we didn't have digital. Without Instagram culture, we wouldn't have the fast fashion. We wouldn't be buying twice as much clothes, 5 times as much clothes as we bought 20 years and wearing them half as long. Every second, there's a truckload of clothes being dumped somewhere in the world, every second. Fast fashion could not happen without MacBooks. We have now 24 seasons in the year. 25 years ago, we had 2 seasons in the year. You can't create 24 seasons if you've got a pencil and paper. Only with MacBooks and networks, only with digital can we accelerate the production of waste and the production of the stuff that is destroying our world and the future for our children and their children. In digital, everything grows. Everything that digital touches gets bigger. Everything gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Websites back in 2005 were an average of 400 KB. By 2010, they were 700. By 2015, they were 2 megabytes. By 2020, that's actual weight. Why? For what reason? For what purpose? Have they got better? You know, most performance of websites has declined over time in relation to speed of downloading, particularly in mobile devices. Mobile, well, I've done some work with the WHO before the pandemic. About 50% of people who were coming to the website were on mobile. After the pandemic kicked in, it was 75%. Right? So a lot of these people who are on ordinary mobile phones, waiting for 4 or 6 megabyte pages can take them 10, 15, 20 plus seconds for those pages to actually download. What's the benefit? Why have they got so much better? The vast majority of websites have not. It's just bloatedness and obesity in the process. And all of this activity, all of this, it's interesting. You can map the explosion of the modern computer era, which began in the 70s, by the way, with one of the modern technology has grown. The earth has been degraded at a pace that has never before happened since human beings have arrived on this planet. Collapse in marine populations, wildlife collapse. Wildlife populations have fallen by more than 2/3 in 50 years. And look, as we see Moore's law, as we see the expansion of our devices, 10 billion smartphones have been made since 2007. So with the increases in power has been greater capacities to create crap and useless stuff. It'd be one thing if we were actually creating things that were useful, things that had genuine value. It would be one thing if all this progress had resulted in life expectancy doubling or something. But actually, the United States in. So in the country that is the most digitized, their actually life expectancy is actually declining. So where are all the core benefits when electricity came along? It radically changed society in so many ways for the better. The railways had huge impacts. Where has all this digital stuff really positively impacted societies? In the most digitized societies, the middle classes are in decline. Whether we are talking about the UK or Ireland or the United States or there's a constant pressure on the middle classes because of digital technology. So much of the promise of this has actually not been delivered. So what do we do? How do we change from this addiction to these tools of producing more, this cult of volume, this sense that, you know, we can just produce all this stuff? There's a lot of good and positive thinking looking at changing the whole models of how we measure economic activity, from GDP to you know, health and you know, good well-being and issues like that. But I think at core we have to move away from the model which measures and rewards people based on what they create and what they consume. If we encourage creation and production, that is what we get in the process. So creation and production will always be, you know, part of the world, but it needs to be balanced with other pillars or other models of thinking. We need to much more encourage a maintenance culture where we maintain what we create, because in most environments, whether we are content people or whatever, we don't look after what we've created. It's the launch and leave culture. Driven in organizations, certainly I have interacted with. That is beginning to change. There is some very positive signs. But how do we get to a much more maintenance-driven culture? Also a sharing culture where there is an incentive for us to share what we have created, to get other people to use it, or, you know, what we write or you know, images we create or whatever, that there's an incentive for us to get other of our colleagues, if we're working in government or whatever, to actually use that in a project that they are building. This sense of sharing, and of course very connected with that is reuse. that there's an incentive for us to reuse. You know, right now, you know, we all go, oh, I need to create this, rather than, does this already exist? Could I reuse a part of this code? Is there a description for the symptoms of COVID-19 already in existence? Could we reuse and build on it? No, we'll write our own. You know, that's all. You know, we're unique. You know, what we learned when we did the big project for WHO and COVID-19 was that all over the world they had the same needs. You know, all over the world they had the same worries. All over the world they were worried about the same type of things. But we can't find the space to do that. It's funny. 2,000 years ago, humans were much more collaborative than they are today. It has been the rise of the industrial economies that has really created this myth of the heroic individual that always creates their own stuff and is independent, whether they are a writer or a photographer or whatever. We can only create a sustainable future if we create a much more collaborative future, and a future upon which we have core pillars of maintenance, sharing and reuse. And that's very difficult in the models that we have. I don't know if this is still the case, but I remember seeing a talk by Tricia Dial maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, when she was leading the content at gov.uk, and she was saying changing a piece of mainstream content on gov.uk takes at least 17 steps. Who'd want to change? Who'd want to change anything in an environment where it takes 17 steps? And this is very typical in large organizations that I deal with. That the processes and the thinking, you know, the whole engine of the content management system is geared the creation and publishing of the thing. And when it comes to maintaining or archiving or evolving or removing or deleting, all of these things are not properly thought about, not properly designed. We need much more thought and much more effort around the models of how do we maintain and how do we evolve and how do we look after this and ultimately archive or delete it. From a basic storage point of view, archiving is 150 times less energy intensive than having that content immediately available, because archival storage options are more cumbersome to actually reach the content, because they're stored in more off type, cold type environments. So it takes more time to get that piece of content back if you want to get that piece of content back. But the benefits are that it requires much less energy. So thinking at every step in the process, I've found has been really useful about waste. You know, if we are always asking the question, how do we reduce waste in this situation, we often end up making much better decisions than if we're thinking about how do we produce this or how do we get this published in the process. The craziness that's happening in the world. Of course, one of the reasons websites have grown so large is because of images and videos. Videos are now supposed to be about 80% of web traffic. And creating stuff that has absolutely no use. That's the world gone utterly, utterly crazy. Most humans can see stuff at about 2x pixel density, right? And particularly if we're looking at stuff on a mobile phone or an actual laptop, 2x density is more than enough. If you go up to 3x or 4x density, most people in 99.9% can't see the difference. And certainly when you go up to 8x, or you're into ridiculous territories. And yet these are things that are being sold as features in phones. But once you go up these tables, you don't just double in volume. So the weight of an image that's saved in 4x pixels versus 1x is 16 times heavier. So we're creating all this waste and there isn't even any benefit for this waste. What an extraordinarily wasteful species we are. Human eye can't see the difference. 1.4 billion photos taken every year. And I guarantee 90% of those are crap. If we, when we took those 10 photos, if we actually took 10 minutes after to look, we would delete 9 of them because they're out of focus or whatever. And of course, keep collecting them. And then we're never going to look at any of them because we've got 5,000 of them. And how would we look at any of them now in the process? So this world that we're being dragged along in is not good for the planet, and it's not good for us either. We are addicts, so many of us. And I say that from my own perspective. I'm trying to be a recovering addict from this. So thinking about waste and looking at the areas of energy efficiency in the process. I did a little experiment where I saved a bunch of content on an ordinary HTML page. It came in at 39 kilobyte. I saved the exact same piece of content as a PDF, and it was 141 kilobyte. So not alone are PDFs horrible, 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 in so many ways, from accessibility and usability and all sorts of other ways. They are horrible for the planet. They are at least 3 times more polluting and heavier. And we start thinking about these issues, thinking about, how do we reduce waste? How do we increase energy efficiency? These are fractional gains in the larger scale of things, but it is the culture that they begin to create, a culture of conservation rather than a culture of consumption and creation. So here, I've been doing some calculations or trying to collect calculations. This is from Mike Berners-Lee, who's the brother of Tim Berners-Lee. And he was trying to calculate what is the most energy efficient way to communicate. So if you want to say, thanks very much for your message, a simple message like that, the most efficient possible way to do that is an SMS. Right, so if you like SMSing, that's the least polluting method. The same message. So let's say if we say 1 unit, if 1 unit of CO2 is created by sending a CMS of an SMS of that message, then sending the exact same message by email creates 285 times more. Because there's so much more architecture and templating and etc. and coding around email. But calling somebody and saying, oh, I just want to say thanks very much for your message, bye, right? That's 7,000 times more CO2. If we got on a standard video to say that message, it's 53,000 times more. And if we decided we do it on high definition video, it's 81,000 times more. So we see the scale and things. Now, you could say, well, if we drove to their door and knocked on their door and they opened the door and says, thanks very much for your message, bye, and got back in the car and drove home again, well, that would probably be 300,000 times more. Yes, it would. Maybe it'd be 500,000 times more damaging to the environment. But, that doesn't mean we can now use high definition video or standard video because, hey, at least we're not driving. I actually saw a study which found that people are driving just as much as they drove before the lockdown. They're just not driving into work. So we're having our online meetings. We're still driving as much as we ever drove. So things are getting worse, right, in the process. So looking at the decisions that we make from the consequences that they have and choosing the least harmful communication vehicle. Sometimes it's absolutely essential to get, looking and have video. Will take up about 36 megabyte if it's done over the internet. Actually, if you do it over a phone line, it's probably only about 6 or 10 megabyte. Traditional phone lines, which we don't have anymore, the vast majority of us, are far more efficient at phone calls than the internet is, because the internet was not designed for that. The standard video creates about 270 megabyte, high definition 540 megabyte, ultra high definition 1.3 gigabyte. So stuff in habits of, keeping video off if we're not talking, or having the video on for the first couple of minutes. I'm thinking now about the video being on here in this process. Maybe it's useful in giving this talk, but thinking about these issues and making these decisions. If we can scale these decisions in the millions, and change behaviors, we can really make a difference and do the right thing. And thinking as designers of content. So you're buying a product, right? And it says you've got two options. You got the Express or you got the International Tract. It's $3.95. Now, fast delivery has very negative consequences for the environment. All sorts of negative consequences. The truck will be less full. So it'll be less optimized with use of petrol, etc. Faster driving, the driver will be more stressed. Those poor drivers constantly under the lash to get these things delivered. How can that be good for their health and good for their futures? Larger stock levels will have to be, if you want to get stuff and you guarantee, we'll get within an hour, you're going to have to keep far more stock than if you say, well, you get within a week. In the process. And certainly if you're delivering food, you're going to have much more food waste in the process. So fast delivery has a lot of negative consequences for the overall environment. But we want it. We want it within an hour. We want it within a day. At least that's the way I used to think until very recently. So imagine, how would you approach that as a designer? To actually think about that sort of problem. So I was thinking that instead of having this sort of page, supposing we had this sort of page and it said, hey, do you want green delivery or do you want express delivery? Oh, what's green delivery? Everyone wants green delivery. Well, green delivery is blah, blah, the truck will be more full, it'll take 3 days, but it's better for the environment. And then you start thinking, well, I really don't need it today. Yeah, I can wait for 3 or 4 days. Yeah, and I'm doing something good for the planet. How do we, create environments where we educate people about better options that they can make that are less damaging to the actual environment? There we see on some websites, they're saying this page is using how much of data, in the process. You want to send an email to us? Remember, that's 4G of CO2. This was another calculation from Mike Berners-Lee, saying, do you want to create 4G of CO2? Maybe I don't want to send that email. Do I really need to send that email? Do I really need to do this? All of these thoughtful moments, if we can scale them over millions of people, we can really make a difference in, helping the climate and saving devices from being constantly being used, and therefore they have a longer lifespan, etc. 200 million trees are cut down every year to deal with US e-commerce returns. Just returns. And this is pre-pandemic. It's now probably 400 million or 600 million. Who knows? So e-commerce is better than physical commerce, but the return rate in e-commerce is at least 3 to 4 times higher than in physical commerce in the process. 25% of all e-commerce purchases are sent back in the US. 56% of all are returned. 48% of electronics are returned. 30% of shoppers deliberately over-purchase, will buy 4 or 5 pairs of shoes only with the intent of keeping one of them in the process. What sort of culture is that? So the benefits of e-commerce are told, and a lot of these products end up not being reused. They end up being thrown out and dumped in the process. There's a massive underlying crisis in e-commerce in relation to returns. So how could content people actually help reduce returns? What could we do? Quality content can help reduce returns, around the color, around the size, around the description. How can we, work with color? How can we show size, help explaining size so that people get a real feel? How can we give a better, clearer description of the product so people know exactly what they are buying, or they've the best possible understanding. So to find out what's exactly confusing and explain it clearly and simply, and try and understand what is it, you know, in what environments, where are the most returns happening, etc., etc. This is a case where maybe showing more images is a good thing. There's a trade-off. Images that show products, you know, can be genuinely beneficial. So, but are the images that we're using, do they have the correct color? You know, have they been optimized? Are they showing the right blue? Is it close enough to the actual blue of the pair of shoes? Is there things associated in the image that people think they're getting in the package? And then when they don't get it, they say, but it was in the image, and then they return it. So are more product images needed? Would a video help in actually explaining how to use the product or what, you know? So in the context of really trying to help people make the best decision so that the product doesn't get returned in the process. That is a much bigger concept potentially than just e-commerce. We think about in government. If we can help people make the right decision online, then they don't have to send an email. So we've saved at least 4G of pollution. They don't have to get on the phone for a half an hour creating 20 megabytes of actual pollution. So we can do lots of things in our design, looking at and evaluating it from a point of view of energy conservation and pollution reduction, and hopefully getting away from this sort of model of thinking. Wonderful stuff. Canada government does. I've worked a lot with Canada government. This was a set of metrics that came out at one stage. These are not highlights. You know, this is the cult of volume, measuring, oh, the page views, return visits. How is return visits good? And we had this number of searches and etc. In the process. So breaking away from this cult of production, and look at how many pages we had, and look at how many searches we had. If the search engine worked properly, maybe you'd have far less searches. But we are measuring glut. We are measuring overload. We are encouraging glut. We have a world that is driven by the cult of volume, and that is killing the world, and it's killing our careers. And I think we need to focus much more on the completion of the task, that they got the right product and they didn't return it, that they understood that they were eligible for this benefit or not, and they didn't have to get on the phone. And that they did it in the shortest possible time, because the less time that they're online doing this sort of service, the less battery and energy that they're using. There are all sorts of good metrics around measuring the outcome of the environment rather than measuring the production that occurs within the environment. Many years ago, I met a guy called David Shaw. He was working for Scottish Enterprise. And before he had become the editor in ScottishEnterprise.com, this is going back many years now, maybe 10 or 15 years. And before he had become the editor in Scottish Enterprise, he used to be the editor of Scottish Fishing Weekly, which is a very popular magazine in Scotland among fishermen. And I've got a 50% annual subscription offer, of 50% off, if anyone wants to get in touch with me after this, who might be interested in an annual subscription to Scottish Fishing Weekly. Now, when David was the editor of Scottish Fishing Weekly, he spent 4 days of the week on the road. 4 days out at the ports, out talking to the fishermen. Sometimes, you know, he'd be, you know, in Brussels or whatever, and you know, looking at the legislation or discussing people. But only on a Friday did he actually come into the office. And I said to him, I said, David, now you're the editor of ScottishEnterprise.com. How many days are you on the road out talking to the customers? You know, how many days do you think? No days. He had gone from no days to from 4 days to no days. And I said to him, I said, well, David, how can you know your customer? you know, how come you felt you needed to spend 4 days out there really understanding the story before you wrote it, and now you're you know, you've no real interaction with your customers? And he said, well, I don't know my customer anymore. And he said, well, essentially, I've become a put-it-upper. And a put-it-upper, it comes from the Latin putidupo. I put stuff up. And I thought I wouldn't need to be showing this, you know, anymore, these sorts of slides. But still, in so many organizations, we're either putting up apps or putting up bots or putting up whatever. You know, we still have not got to a world where quality content matters and where we think 90% of the time rather than act 90% of the time and think 10% of the time. These ideas are as old as, you know, that's what Einstein said. He'd think 90%, 95% about a problem. Then he'd write if he only had an hour to solve the most complex problems. The basic old concepts of quality are still relevant. You know, just because we've had all this change and all this so-called innovation, the world has got better. In many cases, it has got much worse. And a return to some real basics focused on quality and focused on really making decisions based on not just what is best for the organization, not just what is best for the customer, but what is best for the planet, the Earth experience. That is needed. And that sort of thinking can help us create a better, more sustainable world. Thanks for listening, and hopefully I haven't gone on too long, and we have time for questions.
Absolutely, we do. Gerry, thank you very much. That was excellent. You've really made me think about my own spending habits and what I do for a living as well, which is creating content. We've had a lot of questions actually for you, and I'm really pleased to see. So I'll ask you one, and then I'll hand over to the my glamorous assistant, Joe. But a question here from Rachel Norton saying, what do big organizations do? For example, does Google have an ethical responsibility to reduce the waste? You did mention that there was something like 90% of websites don't get any traffic from Google. Could Google do something about this?
In essence, no, because, well, Google says it does a lot, but the Google business model is about us consuming. You know, Google's whole structure and the whole structure of Silicon Valley and all the companies, and so many of the companies from Google to Facebook, are based on waste. Their model, their intrinsic model, is about wasting the world. They may say, well, we're destroying the world with renewable energy, aren't we great? But their whole structure and essence is to get us to consume as much as possible, because their model is quote unquote free. You know, whenever it's free, it's killing the world. Be guaranteed. You know, anything that's free has a huge cost to the earth underneath the structure. So certainly the Google search model is absolutely founded on selling us shit as much as possible. You know, Google would have to totally change its model to offer like a subscription model for, I would pay, you know, I would pay €10 a month to Google for a search engine with no ads and no tracking. And maybe they might think of that model somewhere down the line. But any sort of organization that has a free model has an earth destruction model, and it can, you know, fiddle at the edges by having renewable servers, but its core business model is destructive, because its core business model is about getting us, you know, for that free offer to buy loads of stuff that we don't really want and don't really need.
Thank you, Gerry. We've got another question from Rachel Makin. Have you got any tips on how to convince organisations or senior leaders to leave behind the launch and leave culture and embrace a more maintenance-driven approach? So I guess it's getting rid of all those vanity metrics.
Yeah, I think it's the changing the metrics, because the metrics on a global basis, but there's a lot of talk now, the metrics of GDP, we have metrics of production and consumption that run so much around our economic structures. So there's, these things are not absolutely firm. Nothing is firm. Nothing lasts forever. That's what we know for sure. A lot of these economic models are a couple of centuries old. They can change if there's the will to change. And I think showing that there's another more effective model of measurement, showing that if we really focus on the person doing what they need to do, it reduces support calls, it reduces emails, it reduces, and as a result, there is greater savings and greater benefits to the organization and the society. I've no question that this is a better model, both economically, an outcome-based model, and it's both better for the customer, better for the citizen, better for the earth. The only people it's not better for are the people, the advertisers and the Facebooks and the Googles, who are dependent on this mass consumerism consumption models. So measuring outcomes of the success of people doing what they need to do, breaking away from those cults of, we launched the app, we're still, so crazily primitive in how we measure digital. In fact, primitives were much more sophisticated than we are. 2,000 years ago, they wouldn't have measured the success of their hunt in the way we measure success today. But we are stuck in this cult of volume, and unless we break out with new metrics, we will never get to a better world.
Another question here from Rebecca Barry, one of my colleagues, and I'm asking this because I'm interested also. Could we reduce the glut by reducing SEO practices? Because SEO is about volume, repetition, and a lot of people still believe in volume and repetition. I don't. I think good SEO, good content, good SEO will fall out of that. But is that something that we could do? Is that something that as content designers we could potentially push for, to push back against like the glut of SEO volume?
It's an interesting thing. I think maybe if you were looking at the outcome-based metric there, you'd say you optimize for the searcher, rather than the search engine. So if you said, how is Google SEO'd? If you go to the Google homepage, that would drive SEO people mad, wouldn't it? They'd say, oh, where's the text that says, welcome to Google, the world's greatest search engine. On our website, you can search. It's a wonderful place to search on. Most of the really successful entities are not SEO'd. They're actually useful, and social media or whatever becomes the SEO engine of saying, hey, you should use this because it's really good for booking a flight, or it's really good for doing something in the process. So we've lost, again, so much SEO, so much of the web is gangsterism. It's con artistry. 90% of SEO is spam gangster type of behavior. It's all about the con, selling the con to people, right? But actually creating quality, something that actually works, something that's genuinely useful. That's the best SEO of all. I mean, you look at the Google homepage, it's not SEO'd. It's just a search box and a search button. So many of the truly successful web entities are not SEO'd in the strict, sense. And so much SEO is just gangsterism. It's just spammy type of short-term, bring in of the and we can experiment, in certain parts or certain products and see, that this is working, because, where I've worked with organizations, it does work. You do something well, you make it genuinely simple. You answer all people's questions, you have transparent pricing, etc., in the process, and of course you need to do some marketing, you can't be invisible either. But we have lost focus so often, and particularly with so many SEO practices, I believe anyway.
It makes it sound a little bit like those people who work in Benidorm outside bars trying to get you in with a free drink.
Well, exactly.
Handing out flyers, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And look at how many people we brought to the website. Yeah, but most of them, most of them didn't intend even to go to the website in the first place, or just came in for the free drinks, or, whatever. So you're not actually doing anything useful other than creating volume and metrics that you can feed up, the hits, how idiots track success.
So I think Joe's got one more question for you.
And I used to do that job in Greece.
I could just imagine. We'll catch up on that later.
So we've got a question from Lauren Tormey. What do you see as the balance between not piling up waste, but also wanting to preserve information for historical purposes, like news items you might store?
Well, that's a great question. And the issue is, not everything that is created is historical. So we should need to establish to begin with. There is genuine crap. There is junk. There is total, utter junk, right? That has absolutely zero value. And I've dealt with it in so many years in my own environment, or otherwise. And if you include that junk with the general archival stuff that needs, it'll make it extraordinarily difficult to track the historical record over time. So there is stuff that needs to be archived. So we need strategies. We need strategies that look at what is current, what is archivable, what should be archived, and what should be deleted. There is data being thrown off today at types of data that has no value because it's in all the other data. A huge number of data analysts today are complaining that they're like washing machines. Most of their work is spent cleaning up the crap before they can even get close to do insights and analysis on stuff. So there's huge quantities of stuff that has no archival value, and then there's stuff that has genuine historical archival value, and we need processes and thinking and decisions around that, and we don't have those in most organizations because we have no value for the future. Our societies today are so focused on the here and now, so structured. In most organizations I deal with today spend less time on information architecture than they did 20 years ago. In an age when there's an explosion in data and information, in a great many organizations I'm dealing with, they have less skill sets around information architecture design than they had 20 years ago. That's crazy. And the reason it's happening is because they believed in the magic of the technology, that the content management system would actually organize the content as well, somehow. It doesn't.
Well, we've decided between us that we've got quite a few questions. We're going to ask a couple more, Jerry, if you're happy to answer.
I'm here. I'm in Ireland. It's in lockdown, so I'm not going anywhere.
We're here for the night. Okay. And we've got a question from Dave Cunningham. Also, he said it was an amazing talk. We've had a lot of love for you in the chat, which is excellent. And he wondered, have any of your behaviours changed? What are you doing differently?
I'm as bad an addict as I ever. Up until about 3 years ago, I changed my phone every 2 years. I did so, and of course I flew all over the world and talks and etc. and bought this and bought that and had big screen. I'm doing this just with my laptop. I have an office downstairs with a big 30-inch monitor. I don't use it anymore because one day I discovered that the monitor consumes more energy than my whole laptop consumes in the process. And I've made every mistake 100 times over, and I feel ashamed and embarrassed of the life I have led. And I was watching all this stuff, years ago, 2 or 3 years or 4, and seeing Greta Thunberg and all those wonderful young people, going out demonstrating. I was thinking, that's great. And am I so lucky? I work in digital. We're just so pure over here. Isn't digital? It's so great. It's so green. I thought I was wonderful. And then I began to dig in a little, and I realized, wow, there's such a story underneath this, and the e-waste, and how I change my laptop every 2 years. I change my phone every 2 years. I've committed every sin under the sun. I'm the repentant one now, trying to get back something of all the damage that I've done throughout my career. So I've done it all, and very, very belatedly and very, very late on have learned some lessons, and are trying to learn more.
Well, people are forgiving you, and I think we all feel the same now. We all are guilty of everything that you've just said. So, you're offsetting any bad behaviour by doing this now.
Well, hopefully, and the thing is that if each one of us, if you believe this stuff, it's not enough for you to believe it. Tell at least one other person, because so few people really understand. It's not just digital in itself. It's the accelerant of what digital does. So if you believe this stuff, take it upon yourself to convert another person and get them to convert another person, so that we can make it. Because most people I talk to, in digital industry, are totally eyes going, what? Are you serious? Never thought about that.
Is there a statistic in your book, do I remember rightly, Gerry, about, is it like 3.5%? It takes 3.5% of society to make substantial change to that society.
Yeah. This is a study of a big study of revolutions throughout history, when did things really change in society, and they saw that once you get to about 3% population, that is a significant, that can really drive change within societies, if they're enthusiastic, if they're passionate, and if they're willing to commit themselves. That 3% of a society can really begin to shift thinking within a society. So we don't need to get to 50%. We don't, particularly if we're with a wave, and we're with the wave of general sustainability. So convincing people who believe in sustainability, who we sort our rubbish. You find the person, we put it into the green bag, into the black bag. Well, it's not a massive leap to put it into the archive, to put it into the cold storage, or to put it into the bin. Which of this content should go into the bin? It's not a massive psychological leap for right, because they all have energy impacts.
Yeah, we need to keep spreading the word. We've got maybe 1 minute. I'm going to try and squeeze this last question in, if that's all right.
Ask away. Genuinely, if there's more questions, I'm flexible here.
Thank you very much. So a question from Pete, as well as love for the talk, great talk. Do you have 100 nudges mentally friendly consumer practices, like buying less, repairing things? So I know you mentioned transparent and clear content. Are there any other behavioural nudges you think we could?
Well, behaviour, there's some, apparel or clothes websites where, they're giving information on the total CO2 involved in creating this T-shirt. Like that, how much CO2 from manufacturing to marketing to transport, etc. And helping people make decisions that, well, if you pay, €40 for this, or 30 or 20, whereas the one that's €5 created 7 kg of, and this creates 10, but it'll last you 4 or 5 times longer, because often the cheaper thing creates more pollution, because we don't tax waste, really. We tax the wrong things in many of our societies. So somehow helping people, I think the biggest breakthrough for me has been, I thought I had discovered at all when I thought, don't think about the organization, think about the customer. That's what I've spent 20 years, giving talks on, thinking I'm really clever and ahead of the thinking. And I realized, no, there's a level outside of that's much more important. Think about the earth. Think about the larger consequences. Think about all life on earth. Think about this plastic is a 2-minute decision to purchase, but has a 1,000-year life consequence for the planet. So thinking about and I know I came across, there's some methods. Somebody tweeted about it yesterday, I think, about working methods around thinking about the broader consequences of our decisions. So I think getting people to think more broadly about the consequences and linking with decisions with energy conservation and and these issues and CO2 reduction, and getting these broader thoughts rather than the narrower focuses of producing this stuff now and getting it up as quickly as possible. I think if we get that broader thinking in, we can really begin to change minds, because 99% of people want to do the right thing. At least most of the time. So if we can get the arguments right, I think we can find a lot of people willing to listen.
Well, this has been incredible. We are going to wrap it up there, Gerry. I'm going to ask, I've got 2 more things I want to say, though. Number one is, you do have a book out. Where can people buy it? Is it on Amazon?
Hopefully the screen is still there. You can get you can read it you can read as much as you want on this site, and if you like it, then there's links to where to buy it from. It's available in most environments. What I did try and do, I tried to create an EPUB file. The EPUB file is about 15 times smaller than my last book in the process. So I tried to create a book that would have the absolute lowest possible, impact in the process, in its actual design, because it seems ironic in a way, creating more content about this. Because it's not about, content can create change. So the quality content matters. Let's really, our jobs are really important as quality arbiters, if we can get that position, regain that position again.
Absolutely. Gerry, that was wonderful. I would also like to say thank you to Jo. Jo actually organised all of this. I am just here as her assistant. So thank you for organising this, Jo. Gerry, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jo.
And for everybody else coming along, I think we've all learned so much from this. It's been wonderful. And also thank you to Carl Turner, who I think put us in touch with you as well. Carl, if you're on, thank you.
Oh, thank
very
you, Carl.
much.
Yes, Carl, that was great.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Do another content review. We shall see, but only if it's high quality. Isn't that right? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.